Amara's first day of sophomore year at Northwood High felt like stepping onto a battlefield, albeit one disguised in brightly colored lockers and the forced smiles of summer-tanned students. She knew the landscape well enough, having navigated its treacherous social hierarchies the year before. But this year felt different, heavier somehow. Maybe it was the lingering anxiety of summer ending, or perhaps a premonition of the weeks to come. Whatever the reason, a knot of apprehension tightened in her stomach as she walked through the bustling hallways. Northwood High was an imposing structure, a sprawling campus nestled in an affluent suburb. Gleaming sports fields stretched out behind the main building, and the air always seemed to hum with a low thrum of privilege. Amara, with her hand-me-down clothes and quiet demeanor, often felt like an anomaly in this environment, a splash of muted color in a sea of vibrant confidence. Her first few classes passed uneventfully, a blur of familiar faces and the droning voices of teachers reviewing syllabi. It wasn't until lunch period, the daily gauntlet of social interaction, that the subtle barbs began. As Amara carried her tray to a relatively empty corner of the cafeteria, a group of girls at a nearby table, their laughter sharp and edged with something unkind, turned their heads to watch her. At the center of the group sat Tiffany, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her designer clothes radiating an effortless superiority. Tiffany's gaze lingered on Amara for a moment, a barely perceptible sneer twisting her lips before she turned back to her friends, a fresh wave of laughter erupting. Amara's cheeks flushed, and she quickly focused on her food, trying to ignore the feeling of being watched and judged. It was a familiar sensation, one she had grown accustomed to since the beginning of the previous school year. Tiffany and her clique had taken an almost immediate dislike to Amara. Their reasons never explicitly stated, but always felt. Perhaps it was Amara's quiet intelligence that seemed to subtly threaten their own academic standing. Or maybe it was simply the fact that Amara was different, an easy target in their carefully constructed social pecking order. The bullying started subtly, with whispered comments about Amara's clothes or her thrift store backpack. Then came the pointed exclusions, the invitations to parties that somehow never reached her, the sudden silences when she approached a group of students talking in the hallway. Over time, the tactics had become more direct, evolving into outright mockery and the occasional cruel prank. Amara had found her locker defaced with insulting graffiti more than once, and she had learned to brace herself for the snickers and rolled eyes that often followed her through the school day. At home, Amara's life was comfortable, if a little solitary. Her mother, Lena, was a driven and successful businesswoman, the CEO of a major corporation with offices in several countries. Lena's days were filled with high-stakes meetings, international travel, and the constant demands of running a global enterprise. She provided well for Amara, ensuring they lived in a comfortable home in a good neighborhood and that Amara had everything she needed. However, the demands of her career often left Lena with little time for the day-to-day details of Amara's life, something Amara both understood and quietly resented. Their house was large and modern, filled with sleek furniture and state-of-the-art appliances. A shiny black SUV waited in the driveway each morning to take Amara to school, a stark contrast to the older, more modest cars driven by many of her classmates' parents. Lena's success was evident in their surroundings, yet she rarely spoke of her work at home, keeping that part of her life separate. Amara knew her mother was important, powerful even, but the specifics remained a hazy and somewhat intimidating mystery. Sometimes during dinner, Lena would ask perfunctory questions about Amara's day, her attention often divided between her daughter and the emails she would occasionally glance at on her phone. Amara would offer brief, neutral responses, careful to omit any mention of the bullying. She didn't want to burden her mother with her school problems, especially knowing the immense pressure Lena was already under. Besides, A small part of Amara still held on to the naive hope that the bullying would simply fade away on its own. After dinner, Lena would often retreat to her home office, the soft glow of her computer screen illuminating the late hours. Amara would head to her own room, seeking refuge in the pages of her books or the world of her sketchbook. There was a quiet understanding between them, a sort of unspoken agreement to navigate their busy lives with a degree of independence. Amara knew her mother loved her, in her own driven and sometimes distant way, and for the most part, that was enough. But as the days at Northwood High wore on, the weight of her secret began to feel increasingly heavy, a silent burden she carried alone through the crowded hallways and the long, lonely nights. The initial sting of the name-calling and the feeling of being excluded began to fester, growing into a constant knot of anxiety in Amara's stomach. What had started as whispered taunts in the hallway now followed her online, the anonymous comments on her social media posts echoing the cruel words she heard at school. A picture Amara had innocently shared of a school project was soon bombarded with laughing emojis and demeaning remarks about her appearance and her intelligence. It felt like there was no escape, the digital world amplifying the negativity that already permeated her school day. Tiffany, the leader of the group, seemed to relish in finding new ways to make Amara feel small. She would orchestrate subtle exclusions during group projects, ensuring Amara was always the last to be picked or deliberately left out of important decisions. In the cafeteria, Amara would often find herself alone at a table, the whispers and glances from Tiffany and her friends feeling like physical blows. Even the simple act of walking down the hallway became an ordeal, the fear of encountering their mocking gazes a constant weight on her shoulders. Amara tried to shrink into herself, hoping that if she became invisible, the bullying would stop. She started wearing oversized hoodies and kept her head down, avoiding eye contact whenever possible. Lunchtime became a solitary affair in the library, surrounded by the comforting silence of books, a temporary refuge from the hostile environment outside. Her grades, once a source of pride, began to slip as her focus shifted from academics to simply surviving each day. The joy she used to find in her favorite subjects waned, replaced by a pervasive sense of dread. Sleep offered little respite. Amara's nights were often filled with restless tossing and turning, the cruel words echoing in her mind. She would sometimes wake up in a cold sweat, her heart pounding, the humiliation of the day replaying in vivid detail. The sanctuary of her own thoughts had become a battleground, the bullies' voices having taken up permanent residence in her head. At home, Amara worked hard to maintain a facade of normalcy. Her mother, Lena, was a force of nature, a whirlwind of business meetings, international calls, and late nights at the office. Amara knew her mother carried the weight of a massive corporation on her shoulders, and she couldn't bear the thought of adding her own teenage troubles to that burden. So, she smiled and nodded when Lena asked about her day, offering vague and non-committal answers. She would often retreat to her room, burying herself in books or homework, creating a carefully constructed wall between her inner turmoil and her mother's demanding world. Lena, however, was more perceptive than Amara realized. She noticed the subtle changes in her daughter's demeanor, the quietness, the slight withdrawal, the way Amara's smile didn't quite reach her eyes anymore. But Lena was also used to compartmentalizing, to focusing intently on the task at hand. She attributed Amara's moodiness to the usual ups and downs of adolescence, trusting that her bright and capable daughter would navigate these challenges on her own. She made a mental note to spend more quality time with Amara when her current project at work eased up. Unaware of the silent storm brewing beneath her daughter's carefully constructed calm, Amara tried to find solace in the few things that still brought her joy. She lost herself in the pages of fantasy novels, escaping to worlds where courage and kindness always triumphed over evil. She spent hours drawing in her sketchbook, creating intricate and imaginative designs, a silent outlet for the emotions she couldn't express verbally. But even these cherished activities offered only temporary relief. The shadow of the bullying always lurking at the edges of her awareness, waiting to creep back into the forefront of her mind. She felt increasingly isolated, trapped in a cycle of fear and anxiety, unsure of how much longer she could keep up the pretense. The weight of her secret was becoming heavier with each passing day. The initial weeks of the school year bled into October, the vibrant colors of autumn mirroring the increasingly turbulent emotional landscape of Amara's life. The bullying, emboldened by its initial success, grew more insidious. The whispers turned into taunts shouted across crowded hallways. The online mockery escalated to include doctored photos and fabricated rumors, and the subtle exclusions became deliberate acts of sabotage. During a group science project, Amara found her carefully constructed model inexplicably destroyed just hours before the presentation. The look of feigned innocence on Tiffany's face as she offered a hollow apology was like a physical blow. Amara, her carefully contained emotions finally threatening to spill over, managed to bite back tears and salvage what she could. But the disappointment and humiliation lingered long after the presentation was over. Lunchtime remained Amara's daily exile to the library. But even that sanctuary began to feel less safe. Sometimes, she would find notes tucked into the pages of books she had been reading, anonymous messages filled with hateful words and cruel personal attacks. The anonymous nature of the notes made them even more unsettling. The feeling of being constantly watched and targeted a suffocating presence. The online harassment intensified. Amara's social media accounts were flooded with hateful comments, and a fake profile was created in her name, posting embarrassing and fabricated content. The digital world, once a place for connection and self-expression, had become another arena for her tormentors, amplifying their cruelty and reaching into the very privacy of her own home. Amara felt increasingly isolated, cut off from the online spaces where she had once found community and belonging. Her grades continued their downward slide. The constant anxiety made it difficult to focus in class, and the exhaustion from sleepless nights sapped her motivation to study. Her once keen interest in learning was replaced by a dull apathy, the weight of the bullying crushing her spirit. Even her cherished hobbies, reading and drawing, offered less and less comfort. The negativity in her mind often overshadowing the joy she used to find in these activities. At home, the carefully constructed wall between Amara and her mother began to show cracks. Lena, despite her demanding schedule, couldn't completely ignore the subtle signs of her daughter's distress. She started asking more direct questions about school, her tone laced with a growing concern. Amara, however, remained reluctant to fully disclose the extent of the bullying, still fearing that she would burden her mother or that Lena wouldn't understand. One evening, Lena came home from work with an unexpected gift for Amara, a brand new laptop, sleek and powerful. Amara was surprised and touched by the gesture, but a small part of her also felt a pang of guilt, knowing the turmoil she was hiding from her mother. As Lena helped her set up the new laptop, she casually mentioned that she had spoken briefly with the school principal that day regarding a minor administrative matter. Amara didn't think much of it at the time, but there was a subtle undercurrent in her mother's tone, a hint of something more than just a routine inquiry. Unbeknownst to Amara, Lena had indeed contacted the school, not about an administrative matter, but because she had received an anonymous email detailing some of the bullying Amara had been enduring. The email, brief but specific, had raised a red flag for Lena, triggering a deep-seated protective instinct. While she didn't yet know the full extent of the situation, the mere suggestion that her daughter was being harmed had ignited a quiet but fierce determination within her. The CEO of the largest company in the U.S. was not a woman to take threats to her loved ones lightly, even if those threats were veiled in teenage cruelty. The wheels had begun to turn, slowly and silently, in a way that Amara could not yet comprehend. The anonymous online attacks escalated, morphing from general insults into targeted personal attacks that felt designed to inflict maximum emotional pain. They dredged up old insecurities Amara barely acknowledged to herself, twisted innocent remarks she had made into embarrassing confessions, and even targeted her budding friendship with Kai, spreading rumors and trying to drive a wedge between them. The constant barrage wore down Amara's already fragile defenses, leaving her feeling exposed and vulnerable. In the physical world of Northwood High, the bullying became more brazen. Tiffany and her group started mocking Amara openly in class, their whispers and snickers just loud enough for her to hear, but subtle enough to be dismissed by teachers as teenage banter. During gym class, Amara would often find herself the last one picked for teams, relegated to the sidelines with a thinly veiled look of disgust from her classmates. Even simple acts like getting a drink from the water fountain or walking to her next class became sources of anxiety, the fear of an unexpected encounter with her tormentors always present. Amara's isolation deepened. She started eating lunch in empty classrooms, seeking solace in the quiet solitude. Kai tried his best to support her, offering encouraging words and sharing his own past experiences with bullying. He would walk her to class and sit with her whenever possible. But even his presence couldn't completely shield Amara from the constant negativity that surrounded her. The friendship with Kai became a precious lifeline in a sea of hostility. But Amara worried that her association with her might also make him a target. The emotional toll of the relentless bullying was becoming unbearable. Amara started experiencing panic attacks, her chest tightening and her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. Small, everyday occurrences, a sudden loud noise in the hallway, a group of girls laughing nearby, would trigger a wave of anxiety, leaving her feeling shaky and on edge. The once vibrant colors of her world seemed to have faded to a dull gray, and even the simplest tasks felt like enormous burdens. At home, Lena's concern for Amara continued to grow. She noticed the dark circles under her daughter's eyes, the way she would often lose herself in thought, and the increasing amount of time she spent alone in her room. Lena tried to engage Amara in conversations, asking about her friends and her classes, but Amara remained evasive, offering clipped answers and quickly changing the subject. The distance between them, already widened by Lena's demanding career, seemed to stretch further with each passing day. Lena, feeling a growing unease, decided to take a more proactive approach. She contacted the school again, this time requesting a meeting with Amara's guidance counselor and the principal. She presented the anonymous email she had received, outlining the specific instances of bullying Amara had endured. Lena's demeanor was calm but firm, the quiet authority of a CEO accustomed to being taken seriously. The school officials, initially dismissive of the anonymous complaint, sat up straighter when they realized they were speaking with Lena Mira, the head of the largest corporation in the country. The principal assured Lena that they would launch a full investigation into the matter and take appropriate disciplinary action. Lena listened intently, her expression inscrutable, her mind already several steps ahead. While she appreciated the school's commitment to addressing the issue, she knew that real change often required more than just official pronouncements and token gestures. Lena had her own plans, a carefully considered strategy to ensure her daughter's safety and well-being, a strategy that leveraged the considerable resources and influence at her disposal. The bullies at Northwood High were about to learn that messing with Lena Wachak's daughter was a very, very bad business decision. Amara, still unaware of her mother's quiet intervention, continued to navigate the treacherous waters of high school, her heart heavy with the weight of her secret torment. A small beacon of light pierced through the oppressive atmosphere of Northwood High in the form of Kai, a new student who arrived midway through October. Kai was tall and lanky, with a quiet intelligence that shone in his thoughtful eyes. He had transferred from another school district and seemed initially overwhelmed by the cliquish nature of Northwood High. Amara, noticing him often sitting alone in the library during lunch, found herself drawn to his gentle demeanor. One afternoon, while both were browsing the science fiction section, Amara noticed Kai struggling to reach a book on a high shelf. Hesitantly, she offered her assistance, and a brief, slightly awkward conversation ensued. They discovered a shared love for classic sci-fi novels and a similar feeling of being somewhat on the fringes of the school's dominant social scene. Over the next few days, Amara and Kai found themselves gravitating towards each other, their shared experiences creating an immediate bond. Kai had his own history with bullying at his previous school, though he rarely spoke of the specifics. He understood the isolating and demoralizing effect it could have and offered Amara a quiet empathy that she hadn't encountered before. He would listen patiently as she recounted some of the more recent incidents, offering words of encouragement and reminding her that the bully's behavior said more about them than it did about her. His presence became a small but significant source of comfort for Amara. He would wait for her before and after classes, walk with her through the crowded hallways, and ensure she had someone to sit with during lunch, even if it was just the two of them in their familiar corner of the library. Kai's quiet strength and unwavering support helped to ease some of the constant anxiety that had been her unwelcome companion for weeks. He reminded her of her intelligence and her kindness, qualities that the bullies tried so hard to diminish. However, even with Kai's friendship, the bullying didn't completely cease. Tiffany and her group seemed to view Kai's presence as another reason to target Amara, occasionally directing their taunts towards him as well. They would make snide remarks about their unlikely friendship and spread rumors about Kai's social standing. Amara felt a pang of guilt, worried that her association with her might be making him a target as well. But Kai remained steadfast, his quiet resilience a silent defiance against their negativity. One particularly cruel incident occurred during a pep rally before a big football game. As Amara and Kai were making their way to the bleachers, Tiffany and her friends blocked their path. Tiffany, with a saccharine smile, pretended to accidentally spill a large cup of soda all over Amara's clothes. The laughter of her group echoed through the crowded gymnasium as Amara stood there, soaked and humiliated. Kai immediately stepped forward, shielding Amara from the onlookers and offering her his jacket. The incident, though deeply embarrassing for Amara, also solidified the strength of her friendship with Kai, his unwavering support a tangible comfort in a moment of public humiliation. Despite Kai's efforts, the constant undercurrent of negativity continued to wear Amara down. The online harassment persisted, and the subtle acts of sabotage and exclusion continued to chip away at her confidence. Amara knew that Kai's friendship was a precious gift, a lifeline in a hostile environment, but she also felt a growing sense of weariness. The effort of constantly being on guard, of trying to navigate the treacherous social landscape of Northwood High, was becoming increasingly exhausting. She longed for the day when she could simply go to school without the constant fear and anxiety that had become her unwelcome daily companions. The weight of her secret, now shared with Kai, still felt immense. A shadow lurking behind every smile and every moment of reprieve. The annual Northwood High Fall Festival was usually an event Amara looked forward to, a day of slightly awkward school spirit, mediocre carnival games, and the faint promise of cider donuts. This year, however, a sense of foreboding hung over her as she reluctantly agreed to go with Kai. He had been insistent, arguing that avoiding school events would only further isolate her. Amara, though still wary, conceded, hoping that the bustling crowds, might offer a degree of anonymity. The festival was in full swing by the time they arrived, the air filled with the cheerful chaos of students milling around, the tinny music of a struggling DJ, and the enticing aroma of deep-fried everything. Amara tried to keep her head down, sticking close to Kai as they navigated the crowded quad. They managed to play a few of the less embarrassing games, Kai even winning Amara a small, fuzzy keychain that she clipped onto her backpack as a small talisman. For a brief period, a fragile sense of normalcy settled over Amara, a momentary reprieve from the constant anxiety that usually clung to her. Their tentative peace was shattered during the afternoon pep rally in the gymnasium. The bleachers were packed with students, the air thick with anticipation for the upcoming football game against their rival school. The cheerleading squad was performing a routine, their movements sharp and energetic, and the football team stood proudly on the basketball court, basking in the cheers of their classmates. Amara and Kai found seats near the back of the bleachers, hoping to remain inconspicuous. Just as the principal took the microphone to announce the special guest for the rally, Amara felt a sticky, cold liquid pour down the back of her head. A wave of mortification washed over her as she realized what had happened. The laughter started almost immediately, a chorus of cruel amusement erupting from the section of bleachers behind them. Amara instinctively reached up to touch her hair, her fingers coming away coated in a mixture of soda and something else, something chunky and unpleasant. She turned around, her face burning with shame and anger, to see Tiffany and her usual entourage doubled over with laughter, each of them holding empty cups. Tiffany, wiping a fake tear from her eye, called out in a voice loud enough for those nearby to hear, "Oops! Looks like someone had a little accident." Her friends erupted in another wave of laughter, some of them pointing at Amara and making gagging noises. The humiliation was overwhelming. Amara felt like all eyes in the gymnasium were on her, their gazes filled with pity or, worse, amusement. Her carefully constructed composure finally crumbled, and tears welled up in her eyes. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the bleachers and never be seen again. Kai immediately put his arm around her, trying to shield her from the cruel stares, his own face a mask of anger. Without a word, Amara stood up, her body trembling with a mixture of shame and fury. She pushed past the other students in the bleachers, ignoring their stares and whispers, Kai following closely behind. She didn't stop until they were outside the gymnasium, the relatively quiet hallway a stark contrast to the noisy humiliation she had just endured. Leaning against the cool metal of a locker, Amara finally allowed the tears to fall, her body racked with sobs. The public nature of the prank, the deliberate and malicious intent behind it, felt like a final, crushing blow. The fragile hope she had briefly allowed herself to feel during the festival shattered into a million pieces. This wasn't just teasing anymore. This was outright cruelty, designed to inflict maximum pain and humiliation. Kai stood beside her, offering a comforting presence without saying a word. He understood that sometimes silence was the only solace. After a few minutes, Amara's sobs began to subside, replaced by a cold, hard knot of anger. The shame was still there, a burning ember in her chest. But beneath it, something else was beginning to take root, a quiet but steely resolve. She couldn't keep hiding, couldn't keep absorbing their cruelty. Something had to change. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the relentless cycle of bullying that seemed to thrive within the walls of Northwood High. And deep down, a small, nascent thought began to form. A dangerous seed of realization that perhaps, just perhaps, her mother might be the only one who could truly make things right. The silence in the hallway after they left the pep rally hung heavy between Amara and Kai. Amara leaned against the cool metal of the lockers, the sobs that had racked her body slowly subsiding, leaving behind a hollow ache. Kai stood beside her, his hand resting gently on her back, offering silent support. After a few moments, Amara straightened up, wiping her tear-streaked face with the back of her hand. "I can't believe she did that," Amara whispered, her voice still thick with emotion. "In front of everyone." Kai nodded, his jaw tight with anger. "She's awful, Amara. You don't deserve this." Amara just shook her head, a fresh wave of tears threatening to fall. "It's been going on for so long, Kai. I don't know what to do anymore." They stood there for a while longer, the sounds of the pep rally a muffled echo in the distance. Finally, Kai suggested they go to the library, a familiar sanctuary where Amara could try to compose herself. They walked in silence, the weight of the afternoon's humiliation pressing down on Amara. Later that evening, after Kai had left for home, Amara found herself sitting at the kitchen table, picking at her dinner. Her mother, Lena, was across from her, her attention divided between her meal and the tablet she occasionally glanced at. Lena had noticed Amara's subdued mood, but had refrained from pressing, sensing that her daughter needed space. Amara took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she put down her fork. "Mom," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's something I need to tell you." Lena looked up from your tablet, her expression softening with concern. "What is it, sweetheart? You seem upset." The words tumbled out of Amara, a torrent of pent-up emotions she had been holding back for months. She recounted the whispered taunts in the hallways, the online harassment, the deliberate exclusions, and finally, the humiliating incident at the pep rally. As she spoke, the tears started to flow again, silent tears of frustration and hurt. Lena listened intently, her usual composed demeanor slowly giving way to a look of shock and then a rising anger. She put down her tablet, her full attention now focused on her daughter. She reached across the table and took Amara's hands in hers, her grip firm and reassuring. Amara, her voice choked with sobs, finished her story, the recounting of the afternoon's humiliation, the hardest part to get out. When she was done, the kitchen was silent for a long moment, the only sound Amara's ragged breathing. Lena's eyes, usually sharp and focused, now held a look of intense emotion, a mixture of disbelief, pain, and a growing, fierce protectiveness. She squeezed Amara's hands tightly. "Why didn't you tell me this before, Amara? Why did you keep this to yourself for so long?" Amara sniffled, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I didn't want to bother you, Mom. You're always so busy with work, and I just thought I could handle it on my own." Lena's expression softened with understanding, but there was still a steely edge in her voice. "Sweetheart, nothing that happens to you is ever a bother. And no one, absolutely no one, should have to go through something like this alone. I am so incredibly sorry that this has been happening to you." Lena stood up and pulled Amara into a tight hug, holding her close as Amara finally allowed herself to fully break down, the dam of her emotions finally bursting. Lena held her, stroking her hair and whispering words of comfort until Amara's sobs gradually subsided. Pulling back slightly, Lena looked into Amara's eyes, her own reflecting a quiet but powerful determination. "Amara, listen to me. This stops now. I promise you things are going to change. You will not have to face this anymore." Amara looked at her mother, a flicker of hope amidst the lingering pain in her eyes. Do you really think so, Mom?" Lena nodded firmly, her gaze unwavering. "I know so, sweetheart. I am going to take care of this. You just focus on getting some rest tonight. We'll talk more in the morning, but know this, Amara. You are loved, you are strong, and you do not deserve to be treated this way." As Amara went to her room that night, a small seed of hope had been planted amidst the turmoil. For the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of possibility that the relentless cycle of bullying might finally come to an end. Her mother, the powerful CEO, had finally been made aware of her daughter's pain. And Amara instinctively knew that things were about to change in a significant way. The protective fury that surged through Lena when Amara finally revealed the extent of the bullying was unlike anything she had experienced before. As CEO of global tech industries, Lena was accustomed to high-stakes negotiations, complex strategic planning, and navigating the cutthroat world of corporate finance. She was a master of composure, a woman who rarely allowed her emotions to cloud her judgment. But the raw pain in her daughter's eyes, the recounting of months of torment endured in silence, ignited a primal rage within her. This wasn't a business challenge to be analyzed and overcome. This was an attack on her child, and the rules of engagement were about to change drastically. Once Amara had gone to bed, Lena retreated to her home office, the familiar glow of her multiple monitors casting long shadows across the room. But tonight, the usual spreadsheets and market analyses remained untouched. Instead, Lena began to delve into a different kind of data. Information about Northwood High, its students, and particularly the group of girls who had been making Amara's life a living hell. Her resources were vast and her network extensive. Within hours, Lena had compiled detailed profiles on Tiffany and her primary associates. She knew their parents' names, their professions, their social standing, and even their financial vulnerabilities. Lena's mind, honed by years of strategic thinking, began to formulate a plan, a series of calculated moves designed not just to stop the bullying, but to ensure that those responsible understood the full weight of their actions. This wasn't about petty revenge. It was about protecting her daughter and sending a clear message that harming her child would have significant and lasting consequences. The first step was a discreet call to the chairman of Northwood High's school board, a man who owed Lena a considerable favor from a past business deal. Lena's tone was measured but firm, leaving no room for misinterpretation. She outlined the situation involving her daughter, emphasizing the school's apparent lack of effective intervention despite previous complaints. The chairman, recognizing the gravity of the situation and the potential ramifications of displeasing Lena, assured her that he would personally oversee a thorough investigation and ensure swift and decisive action was taken. Next, Lena turned her attention to the parents of the girls involved. Using her extensive network, she began to subtly exert pressure on their professional lives. A key partnership for Tiffany's father's law firm suddenly became uncertain. A lucrative contract that the mother of one of Tiffany's friends had been pursuing faced unexpected delays. These weren't overt acts of aggression, but rather carefully orchestrated ripples in the fabric of their comfortable lives, designed to create a sense of unease and prompt them to pay closer attention to their children's behavior. Lena also tasked her team at Global Tech with launching a new corporate social responsibility initiative focused on combating bullying in schools. This wouldn't directly target Northwood High, but the public awareness campaign and the resources the company would commit to the issue would undoubtedly put pressure on all schools to take the problem more seriously. The announcement was carefully timed to coincide with the escalating situation at Amara's school. A subtle yet powerful message about Lena's stance on the issue. Despite her carefully laid plans, Lena also knew that she needed to be there for Amara on a more personal level. The next morning, she made a point of having breakfast with her daughter, something that her demanding schedule often prevented. She listened intently as Amara recounted more details of the bullying, offering words of comfort and support. Lena didn't reveal her plans, wanting to spare Amara the potential anxiety of waiting for the situation to unfold. Instead, She focused on reassuring her daughter that she was loved and that she would be safe. As Amara left for school that morning, she carried with her a newfound sense of hope, a feeling that for the first time in months, someone was truly in her corner, ready to fight for her. Unbeknownst to her, that someone was the most powerful woman in American business, a force who was about to unleash her considerable influence to protect her child. The bullies at Northwood High were stepping into a game they didn't even know they were playing, against an opponent whose power and reach were far beyond their teenage comprehension. Lena was about to show them what it truly meant to face the consequences of their actions. The wheels of Lena's influence began to turn with a quiet efficiency that belied the magnitude of her power. Within her expansive network of contacts, there were few doors that remained closed, and even fewer requests that went unanswered. The initial call to the school board chairman had been merely the opening move in a carefully orchestrated campaign designed to protect her daughter and address the systemic issue of bullying at Northwood High. Lena tasked a dedicated team within Global Tech's legal department to discreetly compile comprehensive dossiers on Tiffany and the other students involved in Amara's torment. They delved into public records, social media activity, and even quietly contacted individuals within the family's social and professional circles, piecing together a detailed picture of their lives and affiliations. Lena wanted to understand the dynamics at play, the motivations behind their cruelty, and any potential vulnerabilities that could be leveraged. The information that came back was illuminating. Tiffany's father, it turned out, was heavily reliant on Global Tech Industries for a significant portion of his law firm's business, a connection Lena had deliberately fostered over the years. One of Tiffany's closest friends came from a family that had recently taken out a substantial loan from a bank where Lena held significant shares. Another bully's parent was a mid-level executive at a competing tech company, a company that Global Tech had been considering acquiring in the near future. Lena's network, carefully cultivated and meticulously maintained, provided her with a web of influence that touched almost every corner of the local community. While her team gathered information, Lena made a direct call to Mr. Thompson, the principal of Northwood High. Her tone was polite but firm, the voice of a woman accustomed to being heard and respected. She reiterated her deep concern about the ongoing bullying of her daughter, outlining the specific incidents and the emotional toll they had taken on Amara. Lena didn't make threats or issue ultimatums. Instead, she conveyed a quiet disappointment in the school's handling of the situation, and gently suggested that a more proactive and effective approach was needed to ensure the safety and well-being of all students. Mr. Thompson, who had already received a pointed communication from the school board chairman regarding Lena's concerns, was visibly flustered. He stammered apologies and assured Lena that he was taking the matter extremely seriously. He outlined the steps the school was planning to take, including launching a formal investigation, interviewing students and staff, and implementing stricter anti-bullying policies. Lena listened patiently, acknowledging his assurances, but also emphasizing her expectation of tangible and meaningful results. She made it clear that she would be closely monitoring the situation and would not hesitate to take further action if necessary. Lena's call left Mr. Thompson in a state of considerable agitation. He immediately convened an emergency meeting with the guidance counselors, the assistant principals, and several key teachers. The news that the daughter of Lena Kwok, the CEO of Global Tech, was being bullied at their school sent shockwaves through the administration. The potential repercussions for the school's reputation and funding were significant, and Mr. Thompson knew he had to act swiftly and decisively to mitigate the damage. The school launched its investigation with an almost frantic urgency. Tiffany and her group, along with several other students who had witnessed or been involved in the bullying, were called into the principal's office for questioning. The atmosphere in the school shifted palpably. a sense of unease and heightened scrutiny, replacing the usual teenage nonchalance. The subtle power dynamics that had allowed the bullying to flourish were suddenly under intense examination. Unbeknownst to Amara, the gears of her mother's influence were already in motion, creating ripples that would soon reach the very hallways of Northwood High. While Lena's actions were carefully calculated and remained largely behind the scenes, the subtle pressure she was exerting was beginning to have a tangible effect, setting the stage for a significant shift in the way Amara was treated at school. The CEO of the largest company in the U.S. was quietly waging a war against the tormentors of her daughter, and the battle was just beginning. The emergency meeting Principal Thompson called after his conversation with Lena was fraught with tension. The air in the conference room crackled with a mixture of fear and frantic energy as administrators and guidance counselors exchanged worried glances. The revelation that the daughter of one of the nation's most powerful figures had been subjected to prolonged bullying within their school walls sent a shockwave through the entire administration. Mr. Thompson, his face pale and etched with concern, laid out the situation with a gravity that underscored the potential ramifications. The school's reputation, already a delicate balance in the competitive landscape of suburban education, was now potentially facing a major crisis. The possibility of negative publicity, a drop in enrollment, and even a threat to their funding loomed large. The guidance counselor, who had initially handled the anonymous email Lena had sent, now found herself under intense scrutiny. She stammered explanations about the generic nature of the initial complaint and the difficulty of substantiating anonymous claims. However, her words rang hollow in the face of the stark reality. The CEO of Global Tech Industries was personally involved, and her expectations were clear. A flurry of activity ensued. The school's formal anti-bullying policy, previously a document gathering dust on a shelf, was suddenly brought to the forefront. Investigations were launched, students were interviewed, and teachers were reminded of their responsibilities to ensure a safe and supportive learning environment for all students. The urgency was palpable, driven not by a newfound commitment to student well-being, but by the very real fear of incurring the wrath of Lena Mike. Tiffany and her group were among the first students called into the principal's office. They were met with a stern and accusatory tone from Mr. Thompson, a stark contrast to the gentle rebukes they had received for minor infractions in the past. He laid out the allegations in detail, emphasizing the seriousness of the situation and the potential consequences for their academic careers and future prospects. Initially, Tiffany and her friends tried to deny any wrongdoing, feigning innocence and portraying themselves as victims of Amara's sensitivity. However, Mr. Thompson, armed with the knowledge of Lena Tark's involvement and the implicit threat of repercussions, was not easily swayed. He presented them with specific details of their actions, including the online harassment and the incident at the pep rally, making it clear that he had credible information and that their denials would not be accepted. Faced with the principal's unwavering stance and the palpable tension in the room, Tiffany and her group began to crack. Their carefully constructed facade of nonchalant superiority crumbled, replaced by nervous glances and hesitant admissions. They downplayed their actions, portraying them as harmless pranks and misunderstandings. But the fear in their eyes betrayed their awareness of the gravity of the situation. While the school administration scrambled to address the immediate crisis, Lena continued to work behind the scenes. She received regular updates from her team regarding the school's investigation and the responses from the families of the students involved. She remained patient, allowing the initial steps to unfold. But she was also prepared to escalate her actions if she didn't see tangible and meaningful change. The subtle pressures Lena had exerted on the parents of the bullies began to have their intended effect. Tiffany's father, facing the potential loss of a major client, had a serious and uncomfortable conversation with his daughter about her behavior. the mother of one of Tiffany's friends, worried about the delays in her crucial business contract, began to closely monitor her daughter's online activity and social interactions. The executive at the competing tech company, whose child was also involved in the bullying, received an unexpected phone call from a senior contact at Global Tech, subtly hinting at the company's concerns about the situation. The message was clear, even if it wasn't explicitly stated. Harming the daughter of Lena carried significant consequences that extended far beyond the walls of Northwood High. The bullies, for the first time, were beginning to understand the true power of the person they had unknowingly targeted, a power that was about to reshape their comfortable world. Lena Chok's approach to protecting her daughter wasn't about overt displays of power or public accusations. Instead, she operated with the quiet precision of a seasoned strategist. Leveraging her vast network and considerable economic influence to subtly reshape the landscape surrounding Northwood High and, more specifically, the families of those who had tormented Amara. Tiffany's father, Mr. Thompson, the prominent lawyer, found himself in an increasingly precarious position. The lucrative contract with Global Tech Industries, which had been a cornerstone of his firm's revenue for years, remained in limbo. Calls to Lena's office went unreturned, and emails were met with polite but non-committal responses. A palpable chill settled over his professional relationship with the company, creating an atmosphere of uncertainty and unease. He couldn't pinpoint the exact reason for the sudden shift, but a nagging suspicion began to form in the back of his mind. A disquieting feeling that it might somehow be connected to his daughter's recent troubles at school. Meanwhile, Mrs. Henderson, whose daughter Jessica was one of Tiffany's closest allies, received an unexpected call from her bank. The loan application for the expansion of her boutique business, which had seemed like a sure thing just weeks ago, was now facing unexpected delays and additional layers of scrutiny. The loan officer, while outwardly apologetic, offered vague explanations about shifting economic priorities and the need for further due diligence. A seed of doubt began to sprout in Mrs. Henderson's mind, a subtle feeling that perhaps powerful forces were at play behind the scenes. The situation was even more direct for Mr. Davis, the executive at TechCorp, whose son Michael was also part of Tiffany's group. He received a call from a senior vice president at Global Tech, an individual he had hoped to impress for years in the competitive world of the tech industry. The conversation began pleasantly enough, with polite inquiries about his work and the latest developments at TechCorp. However, the tone subtly shifted as the Global Tech executive casually mentioned Lena Chok's deep commitment to fostering ethical behavior and respect, both within her company and in the wider community. The implication, though unspoken, hung heavy in the air. Any association with unethical behavior, such as the bullying of Lena Chok's daughter, could have negative repercussions. The pressure was mounting, slowly but surely, on the families of the bullies. They couldn't directly trace the source of their sudden difficulties back to Lena Baum, but a sense of unease and a growing suspicion began to permeate their comfortable lives. They started paying closer attention to their children's activities, their conversations around the dinner table taking on a new seriousness. The carefree days of dismissing teenage squabbles as insignificant were beginning to fade. Back at Northwood High, Principal Thompson, still reeling from his conversation with Lena and the subsequent directive from the school board, implemented a zero-tolerance policy on bullying with immediate effect. Teachers were instructed to be more vigilant, and students were reminded of the severe consequences of engaging in any form of harassment or intimidation. The atmosphere in the school had shifted from one of subtle tolerance of the established social hierarchy to one of heightened awareness and a palpable sense of scrutiny. Tiffany and her friends, accustomed to operating with a sense of impunity, suddenly found themselves under a microscope. Their casual acts of cruelty no longer went unnoticed. and even minor infractions drew the attention of teachers and administrators. The power dynamic within their group began to shift, a subtle tension creeping into their interactions as they sensed that the rules of the game had changed. They couldn't quite put their finger on what had happened, but a feeling of unease settled over them, a sense that unseen forces were at play. Amara, though still wary, noticed a subtle shift in their behavior, a hesitant backing off, a less direct approach to their usual taunts. The protective shield her mother had quietly erected around her was beginning to take effect, a silent testament to the power and reach of Lena So. The shift in atmosphere at Northwood High was palpable. The once unquestioned reign of Tiffany and her clique had been subtly undermined, replaced by an undercurrent of unease and a newfound respect, or perhaps fear, for the quiet black girl they had so casually tormented. Teachers, now acutely aware of the potential scrutiny from the school board and, by extension, the powerful figure of Lena, were more vigilant in addressing any signs of bullying. The casual dismissal of teenage squabbles had been replaced by a heightened sensitivity to student well-being. Tiffany, in particular, felt the shift acutely. The comfortable certainty that had always surrounded her had begun to erode. Her father's unusual stress at home, the pointed questions about her behavior from her parents, and the noticeable coolness from some of her parents' business associates had created a knot of anxiety in her stomach. She couldn't quite connect all the dots, but a growing suspicion that her actions at school had somehow triggered these unsettling changes began to take root. One afternoon, Amara was surprised to see Tiffany approaching her in the hallway. Tiffany was alone, her usual entourage nowhere in sight. Her expression was uncharacteristically subdued, the usual smirk replaced by a nervous frown. "Hey, Amara," Tiffany began, her voice hesitant, not meeting Amara's gaze. "Can we talk for a minute?" Amara, initially wary, nodded slowly. They stepped to the side of the crowded hallway, finding a relatively quiet corner near the lockers. "Look, my friends and we've been talking," Tiffany continued, her words coming out in a rush. "And we wanted to say, we're sorry." Amara stared at her, a wave of disbelief washing over her. This was Tiffany, the queen bee of Northwood High, the girl who had made her life miserable for months, was actually apologizing? "Sorry for everything," Tiffany mumbled, finally making brief eye contact. "For the stuff online, for the soda thing at the pep rally. It wasn't cool." The apology felt hollow, the words rushed and insincere, as if they had been rehearsed. Amara could sense the pressure behind them, the unspoken directives likely coming from home. Yet, a part of her also recognized the effort it must have taken for Tiffany to utter those words. Amara remained silent for a moment, studying Tiffany's face. She could see the flicker of discomfort in her eyes, the subtle tension in her jaw. This wasn't a genuine moment of remorse, but rather a calculated attempt to smooth things over, likely driven by external forces. "It's okay," Amara said finally, her voice calm and steady, surprising even herself. "I appreciate you saying that." Tiffany seemed relieved, a visible weight lifting from her shoulders. "Really?" "Yeah," Amara replied, but her gaze remained firm. "But it's not okay, Tiffany. What you did, what you all did, it hurt. A lot. And an apology doesn't just erase that." Tiffany nodded slowly, her earlier relief fading slightly. "I know," Amara continued. I hope that you'll think about why you did it, about how it made me feel, and I hope it doesn't happen again to anyone else." Tiffany mumbled, "It won't." Amara wasn't entirely convinced, but she decided to leave it there. She could sense that Kai was watching her from down the hallway, a silent question in his eyes. She gave him a small nod, a signal that the unexpected encounter was over. As Tiffany hurried away, Amara felt a strange mix of emotions. There was a sense of vindication, a quiet satisfaction in knowing that the power dynamics had shifted. But there was also a lingering sadness, a realization that the apology wasn't born out of genuine empathy, but rather out of self-preservation. Yet, it was a start, a small crack in the wall of hostility that had surrounded her for so long. And for now, Amara decided, that would have to be enough. The subtle intervention of her mother, the quiet power wielded behind the scenes, had undeniably created a change, forcing the bullies to confront, at least superficially, the consequences of their actions. The subtle ripples of Lena Shocking's intervention extended far beyond the immediate confines of Northwood High. While her direct involvement in the school's handling of the bullying remained discreet, the broader impact of her influence began to manifest in ways that resonated throughout the community. The sudden and unexpected scrutiny of the parents of the bullies by their professional circles created a domino effect, prompting a wider conversation about accountability and the consequences of unchecked behavior, both in and out of the school environment. Mr. Thompson, Tiffany's father, found his professional standing slightly diminished. The loss of the global tech contract, while not explicitly stated as a consequence of his daughter's actions, created an undeniable sense of unease within his law firm. Other partners began to eye him with a newfound caution, and lucrative referrals seemed to dry up unexpectedly. The message, though unspoken, was clear. Associations with unethical behavior, even the teenage variety, could have tangible repercussions in the adult world. Similarly, Mrs. Henderson, Jessica's mother, faced unexpected hurdles with her business expansion. The bank, citing revised risk assessments and shifting economic forecasts, ultimately denied her loan application. While other factors may have contributed to the decision, Mrs. Henderson couldn't shake the feeling that the sudden change in circumstances was somehow linked to her daughter's involvement in the bullying incident. The weight of that suspicion hung heavy in the air, prompting a serious reassessment of her daughter's social circles and behavior. Mr. Davis, Michael's father, received a follow-up call from the senior vice president at Global Tech, this time with a more direct message. While still couched in polite corporate language, the executive made it clear that Lena King took matters of personal integrity and respect extremely seriously. He subtly suggested that any continued association with individuals who engaged in harmful behavior could negatively impact future business opportunities with Global Tech. The implication was unmistakable, and Mr. Davis had a long and serious conversation with his son about the importance of making ethical choices. Beyond these individual cases, Lena, through Global Tech's newly launched anti-bullying initiative, began to make a significant impact on the wider community. The company pledged substantial resources to support anti-bullying programs in schools across the state, offering grants, workshops, and educational materials designed to raise awareness and empower students to stand up against harassment. The initiative garnered significant media attention, further highlighting the issue of bullying and putting pressure on schools and parents to take it more seriously. Lena, though she remained behind the scenes, had effectively leveraged her corporate platform to address a problem that had personally affected her daughter. Amara, watching these events unfold, began to understand the immense power her mother wielded, a power that extended far beyond the walls of their home and into the very fabric of their community. She saw the tangible impact of Lena's actions, not just in the changed behavior of Tiffany and her friends, but also in the broader conversations that were starting to take place about the importance of kindness, respect, and holding individuals accountable for their actions. For the first time, Amara began to consider the responsibility that came with such power. She realized that her mother's influence could be used not just for personal gain or protection, but also to effect positive change in the world. This realization sparked a new kind of thinking within Amara, a nascent awareness of her own potential to make a difference. The experience of being bullied, while deeply painful, was also beginning to shape her understanding of justice, empathy, and the importance of standing up for what is right. The silent revolution her mother had initiated was not just about protecting her daughter. It was about fostering a community where such cruelty would no longer be tolerated. The weeks that followed the subtle upheaval at Northwood High brought a significant transformation in Amara's demeanor. The heavy cloud of anxiety that had clung to her for months began to dissipate, replaced by a quiet but growing sense of self-assurance. The fear that had once dictated her every move in the school hallways started to recede, and she found herself walking with a newfound confidence, her head held a little higher. The change wasn't immediate or dramatic, but rather a gradual blossoming of inner strength. Amara noticed that she no longer flinched when she saw Tiffany and her group, their once intimidating presence now carrying less weight. She started meeting Kai's gaze with a genuine smile, no longer burdened by the fear that her association with him would bring him harm. The library still held its comforting appeal, but Amara also began to spend more time in the cafeteria with Kai, no longer feeling the need to hide away. The bullying had not completely vanished, but it had significantly lessened. Tiffany and her friends, undoubtedly still feeling the pressure from home and the watchful eyes of the school administration, kept their distance. The subtle jabs and pointed exclusions had ceased, replaced by a strained neutrality. Amara knew that their change in behavior might not be entirely genuine, but the silence and the absence of their torment brought a sense of relief and allowed her to finally focus on her studies and her friendships. Amara found her voice again. In class discussions, she began to share her thoughts and ideas without the fear of being ridiculed. She rediscovered her passion for learning, her grades showing a steady improvement. She even joined the school's art club, finding joy and self-expression in her drawing and painting once more. The dark colors that had dominated her sketchbook were gradually replaced by brighter hues and more optimistic themes. Her friendship with Kai deepened, their shared experiences creating a bond that went beyond simply surviving the challenges of high school. They found common interests in books, movies, and even debated philosophical questions during their lunch breaks. Kai's unwavering support had been instrumental in helping Amara navigate the difficult months, and their friendship became a source of genuine comfort and joy. At home, the relationship between Amara and Lena also underwent a positive shift. The shared secret of Lena's powerful identity had created a new level of intimacy and understanding between them. Amara no longer felt the need to hide her struggles, knowing that her mother was not only capable, but also deeply invested in her well-being. Lena, in turn, made a more conscious effort to be present in Amara's life, making time for conversations and showing genuine interest in her daughter's day-to-day experiences. They would often talk late into the night, sharing their thoughts and feelings. Amara learned more about her mother's journey to success, the challenges she had overcome, and the importance of resilience and integrity. Lena, in turn, gained a deeper understanding of the emotional complexities of Amara's life at school and the impact that bullying could have on a young person's confidence. Their bond, once somewhat strained by Lena's demanding career, grew stronger and more resilient, built on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect. Amara also began to understand the weight of her mother's influence and the potential for that power to be used for good. Lena continued her company's anti-bullying initiative, publicly advocating for safer and more inclusive school environments. Amara, inspired by her mother's actions, started to think about how she could use her own experiences to help others who might be facing similar challenges. The once quiet and withdrawn girl began to find her own voice, recognizing that her story had the potential to make a difference. The scars of the bullying might still linger, but they were no longer defining her. Instead, they were becoming a source of strength and a catalyst for growth. The silent battle had been fought, and Amara, with the quiet but formidable support of her mother, was finally beginning to emerge victorious. 4 years passed. The halls of Northwood High, once a source of dread, had become familiar territory, the backdrop to countless memories, both challenging and triumphant. Amara stood on the stage in her cap and gown, a bittersweet smile playing on her lips as she looked out at the sea of faces in the audience. Her mother, Lena, sat in the front row, her eyes shining with pride, a subtle warmth radiating from her presence. Kai sat a few rows behind, giving Amara a thumbs up and a reassuring grin. The years since the subtle revolution orchestrated by her mother had brought significant changes. The culture at Northwood High had shifted, the administration taking a much firmer stance against bullying, implementing programs and initiatives designed to foster a more inclusive and supportive environment for all students. Tiffany and her group, though they never became Amara's close friends, had learned a valuable lesson about the impact of their actions and had, for the most part, moved on with a newfound awareness. Amara had blossomed. The fear and insecurity that had once held her back had been replaced by a quiet confidence and a strong sense of self. She had excelled academically, discovering a passion for writing and journalism. She had become an active member of the school newspaper, using her voice to shed light on important social issues and advocate for positive change within her community. Her friendship with Kai had deepened into a strong and enduring bond, their shared experiences forging a connection that felt unbreakable. They had navigated the ups and downs of high school together, supporting each other through academic challenges, first crushes, and the inevitable anxieties of adolescence. Lena had remained a constant source of love, support, and quiet strength in Amara's life. The experience of Amara's bullying had brought them closer, forging a bond built on honesty, trust, and a deep appreciation for each other. Lena, while still a powerful and demanding CEO, made a conscious effort to prioritize her time with Amara, recognizing the importance of being present in her daughter's life. As Amara walked across the stage to receive her diploma, a wave of emotion washed over her. She thought back to those difficult early months of her sophomore year, the feeling of isolation and the crushing weight of the bullying. She remembered the fear and the uncertainty, the feeling of being trapped in a nightmare with no escape. And then she remembered the moment she finally confided in her mother, the turning point that had set her on a path towards healing and empowerment. She knew that her journey hadn't been easy, but she had emerged stronger and more resilient. She had learned the importance of finding her voice, of standing up for herself and others, and of the profound power of kindness and empathy. She had also witnessed firsthand the immense influence that power, wielded with intention and purpose, could have in shaping the world around her. Later that evening, at her graduation party, Amara stood with her mother, watching the laughter and joyful chatter of her friends and family. Lena placed a hand on Amara's shoulder, a warm and loving gesture. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "You've come so far." Amara leaned into her mother's embrace, a sense of deep gratitude filling her heart. "Thank you, Mom," she whispered, "for everything." As the night drew to a close and the stars twinkled in the clear night sky above their home, Amara looked towards the future with a sense of optimism and hope. She knew that challenges would inevitably arise, but she also knew that she had the strength, the resilience, and the unwavering support of her mother to face whatever lay ahead. The clumsy coder who had once been mocked had not only survived, but had thrived, her journey a testament to the power of the human spirit and the enduring bond between a mother and her daughter. The silent revolution had paved the way for a bright and promising future.